a text that often gets highlighted as Stephen's martyrdom. And when I was thinking of a title for the sermons this Sunday, I came to when a prophet meets their persecutor. But the reality is it was persecutors, multiple, not one. I realized as I was hearing this and sitting with this text throughout today that it was a mob that killed Stephen. It was a mob that didn't like what they were hearing, so much so that they covered their ears and then charged him. They didn't like what they heard from him, so much so that they felt threatened or fearful or angry enough to stone him. This particular text, because Stephen's prophecy sounds like it was the fault of the Jews for killing Christ. This very text has been used by mobs to justify the death of Jews. When mobs get angry, their power is hard to stop. When mobs get angry, it is something that allows for people to make up stories and believe them as truth. This isn't new. This isn't the first time. It's not just Stephen's story, but it's happened throughout centuries. I think in our own country here in the States, we've seen where mobs, not just physical mobs gather, but where words and beliefs become mobs, so much so that we begin to kill people with policies, with inaccessibility to human rights, and in such a way that no matter what truth may come before us, to correct those falsehoods, we cover our ears and we charge. When we can't distinguish between the feelings that Pastor Alice so beautifully noted before, our feelings can become our driving source, regardless of whether we really know what we are doing. It's called mob mentality, and we see it so very clearly in this text. Stephen was speaking what he believed to be his truth. And it angered them so much that they could no longer see him, but they saw him as a threat that had to be extinguished. When we, as humans, can no longer see the people we disagree with as human, that we are willing to believe any conspiracy theory, falsehood, or story to justify our beliefs so that we don't have to change, we get closer to being the mob that can easily squelch life. To take someone's life seems so far from so many of us. How could it be? We could never be somebody's killer. We could never be somebody's executor. And I pray to God that is true. And yet there are so many murders that happen in our society. There are so many moments where the mob becomes so prevalent that we lean in, maybe not because we believe it, but we are afraid that if we don't, we will become Stephen. And we know how precious our life is, that we are willing to join the crowd. And in doing so, we forget the precious life of the ones who are being charged at the ones who are being shot at, the ones who are being lynched, the ones who are being killed. This is the murder of Stephen. This is where his life ended. And the very story that captures his life's ending has been used to end other people's lives with justification in our own Christian tradition. If we are not grounded in the Spirit of God, if we are not grounded in a community that challenges us when we begin to say things that could be taken out of context and cause harm, if we do not allow ourselves to see the humanity before us, even in those that disagree with us, we are on a dangerous trajectory. We may never be the ones who pick up the stone, but we could be the ones, much like Saul, collecting the coats. To be the coat checker at a stoning is quite the occupation. Our world is filled with turmoil. It feels unending, spiraling out of control. How could we speak in such a way that we could slow it down or stop it or create a completely different trajectory? So when we can't see how we could be, we stay where we're at. And in staying where we're at, we allow death to come. Not just to the souls that are killed by the mob, but to our own souls. When we stop seeing divine life in front of us, the divine life within us begins to die as well. For you see, we are interconnected. My humanity cannot thrive if your humanity cannot thrive. And if we believe that somehow my life is more important than the one next to me, I will begin to profess falsehoods in order to proclaim my own life, even if it means the others die. Stephen met his persecutors because they were afraid of what his message would continue. They were afraid that the very teachings would challenge their very way of being. And as he proclaims that he sees Christ at the right hand of God, we're told they cover their ears in charge. Because no matter how much you don't want to hear the truth will still reach you. Sometimes, though, you have to physically cover your ears and ignore it. The question before each and every one of us is, how many times will we cover our ears to the truth that's being presented to us? Not because we wish to be at the front of the mob charging the Stephens in our lives, but we are afraid that that mob will turn on us, and we don't know what to do if it does. But what if this story had been met with those who were near dear friends of Stephen? What if they had met and stopped the mob? What if it had resembled more of the woman who had been brought out to be stoned, and Christ says, "You without sin cast the first stone," and they had to drop their weapons? What if there were those who had been there with Stephen in such a way that the mob could not charge, that the mob could not take life, that there were enough truth bearers to disrupt the false stories? this story would be very different. It wouldn't necessarily guarantee that they would have survived, but it would have meant that Stephen was not alone when he drew his final breath. It would have meant that he knew he wasn't the only one trying to speak truth. So my prayer for all of us is that we can be bold enough to join those who have falsehoods being proclaimed against them, to stand with them, finding any and every possible way to invite those holding the stones to drop them. For the sake of the divine breath in those that identify as Stephen, and for the sake of the divine breath in those who hold the stones. I was reminded with this story of the genocide that took place in Rwanda in '94. When I went to study the church's role, I was reminded at how often the church's sanctuary was misused in such a way that they would gather their congregants just to lock the doors and let the chapel be their resting place. I was reminded that faith can be one of the strongest spaces of harm and life, as I learned about that genocide. My question, though, as I learned about the atrocities in '94, was never, where is God? For I heard repeatedly from the Rwandans that God was there, lying with the one who was drawing their last breath and was aching to connect to the one with the weapon in hopes that they would lay it down. My question in these moments is not, where is God? It is, where is humanity? Humanity did not have a good day on the day they murdered Stephen. Humanity has had many rough days since. But we can join God in being with those who are on the receiving ends of the mob's mentality, doing whatever we can to protect the divine life being sought after, and doing whatever we can to connect with those holding the weapons, inviting them continually to lay them down. May we be bold enough to do that. Stephen did not have that boldness join him on his last day. But we have the option of joining that boldness every chance that we see falsehoods coming about that allow life to take its final breath. When anyone meets their persecutors, may we be on their side to protect them. Amen.